The security footage would later show 6:47 a.m. as the moment everything changed at Meridian International Airport. Mason Walker's scarred hands trembled on the leather leash as Frost, his battle-worn German shepherd, suddenly went rigid. The dog's amber eyes locked onto something 30 feet away, a young mother pushing a stroller through the crowded terminal. Without warning, Frost erupted. 7 years of military discipline shattered as the dog tore free from Mason's grip and launched through the crowd. Screams pierced the morning air. The shepherd's muscled body slammed into the stroller, sending it crashing sideways. A glass vial flew from beneath the blankets, shattering against the marble floor. Amber liquid spread like blood across white stone. The skull and crossbones symbol on the broken container made 3 TSA officers freeze mid-step. One grabbed his radio. Another drew his weapon. The third ran not toward the chaos, but away from it. The baby's cry cut through everything else. Before we continue, please leave a like and let me know which city you're watching from. Now, let's get back to the story. Mason Walker hadn't slept through a full night in 3 years. At 58, his body carried the weight of 4 tours in Afghanistan, but it was the weight of one photograph that broke him each morning. Daniel's face stared back from the faded print, 19 years old, fresh-faced in his army uniform, grinning beside Frost just 2 days before the suicide bomber changed everything. The explosion that took Daniel had left shrapnel in Frost's spine and a hole in Mason's soul that no amount of therapy could fill. Now they lived alone in a cabin 20 miles outside Meridian, 2 survivors bound by grief and a loyalty that transcended words. Grace Mitchell understood desperation in ways she never could have imagined before Robert died. At 32, she'd already buried a husband told he'd died in a training accident at Fort Benning, though the details never quite made sense. Her son Tommy, 4 years old and locked in the silent world of severe autism, was all she had left. The medical bills had climbed past $200,000. Insurance called the experimental treatments unnecessary. The specialist said Tommy would never speak, never connect, never live independently. Last week, she'd stolen 2 vials from the hospital pharmacy where she worked the night shift. Potassium chloride and morphine. Enough for both of them. A mercy, she'd told herself, though her hands shook every time she looked at them. Hunter Blackwood had learned to wear expensive suits like armor, hiding the soldier he'd once been beneath $5,000 fabric and a pharmaceutical executive's smile. At 45, he controlled more than just medicine, he controlled secrets. He knew why Robert Mitchell really died. He knew about the heroin pipeline running through veteran networks from Kabul to Kansas. He knew about Mason's last mission, the one that went wrong, the warnings ignored. Most of all, he knew about loss. His own son, Jacob, had died at 6, autistic, uninsured, abandoned by a system that called him a pre-existing condition. Walter Walker lived at Sunny Acres Veterans Home, though at 78, his mind increasingly drifted between Vietnam's jungles and his grandson's funeral. The Alzheimer's diagnosis had come 6 months ago, but his need to honor Daniel's memory burned clear and bright. When the well-dressed man offered to help fund a memorial, Walter hadn't asked questions. He should have. The nightmare came at 4:15 a.m., same as always. Mason jerked awake to the phantom sound of the explosion, Daniel's voice still echoing through the darkness. His sheets were soaked with sweat, his hands clutching at air where his son's hands should have been. Frost lifted his graying head from the floor beside the bed, pressing his nose against Mason's trembling fingers. The ritual began 2 pills for the panic, 1 for the blood pressure, checking the old dog's surgical scars where shrapnel still pressed against his spine. Today marked 3 years since Daniel's death. Mason had booked a flight to Arlington to visit the grave, though the thought of crowds and confined spaces made his chest tighten. He packed slowly. Methodically, Daniel's medals, the photo album from basic training, the last letter his son never got to read. Frost watched with knowing eyes, his tail low, understanding the weight of this particular morning. The dog's food and medical supplies filled another bag. They'd learned to move through the world as one broken unit, each step a small victory against the darkness that threatened to swallow them whole. Grace Mitchell's shift at Meridian General ended at 5:30 a.m. But she lingered in the medication room, her heart pounding against her ribs. The security cameras had a blind spot near the emergency crash cart she'd discovered it months ago. Her fingers found the vials, quickly potassium chloride from the cardiac unit, morphine from the pain management supplies. Both would be missing from inventory soon. But by then it wouldn't matter. Nothing would matter. She'd written the note 3 times, finally settling on simple words: Tommy deserved better than this world could give him. The tickets to Orlando sat in her purse one last trip to Disney World, the only place that had ever made her son smile. She'd crushed sleeping pills into his morning juice, watching him drink it without protest, his trusting eyes never leaving her face. He was so quiet in the car, quieter than usual, his small body already growing heavy against the car seat straps. She'd dressed him in his favorite shirt, the one with the cartoon dogs. If there was a heaven, maybe they'd let him keep it. The airport erupted into Mason's senses like an assault. Every noise scraped against his raw nerves, announcements crackling overhead, children screaming, luggage wheels rattling across tile. His breathing shortened as the crowd pressed closer. Frost stayed tight against his leg, trained to recognize the signs of an incoming panic attack. They'd made it through security, Mason's hands shaking as he removed his boots, feeling exposed and vulnerable. Grace passed through 2 lines over, pushing Tommy's stroller with mechanical precision. The boy wasn't moving, wasn't making his usual sounds. Other passengers shot her tired looks, another mother with a difficult child. They assumed. One woman muttered something about controlling your kid when Tommy had started to stir and whine earlier. Grace hadn't responded. Hunter Blackwood watched it all through the security office monitors, his contact in TSA keeping him informed. He'd been tracking Grace for months, ever since she'd started asking questions about Robert's death. The woman knew too much, suspected too much. The heroin in her diaper bag planted during her last hospital shift would solve that problem. But Mason's presence complicated things. Hunter remembered Mason from Kandahar. Remembered Frost, too. That dog had saved their unit more times than anyone could count, until the day Mason stopped trusting him. The day Daniel died. The convergence happened near Gate 23. Tommy began to wake, his drugged confusion triggering a meltdown. His screams pierced the terminal's morning calm. Grace fumbled with the stroller, trying to comfort him while hiding her tears. Mason recognized the particular pitch of a child in distress, his mind flickering to Afghan villages, children crying in the rubble. Frost's entire body changed ears forward, muscles coiled, his trained nose catching something wrong, multiple somethings. The dog's attention locked on Grace's stroller with an intensity Mason hadn't seen since Afghanistan. Then chaos. Frost's powerful body launched forward, 70 pounds of muscle and purpose slamming into the stroller's side. The impact sent it spinning, Tommy's weight shifting, blankets flying. The glass vial hidden beneath Grace's mercy for them both flew in a perfect arc before shattering against the floor. The amber liquid spread quickly, its medical smell sharp and wrong. But that wasn't what made the security officers freeze. It was the second package that tumbled out wrapped in brown paper. Covered in Pashto script Mason recognized from 100 seized shipments. Heroin, at least 2 kilograms. Tommy's reaction defied everything. As Frost's head pushed into the overturned stroller, the boy's face transformed. 4 years old, nonverbal, unreachable, and he smiled. His small hand reached out, fingers tangling in Frost's fur. A sound escaped him, not quite a laugh, but something alive, something present. Grace collapsed beside them, her careful plan shattered like the vial on the floor. She sobbed relief, terror, confusion mixing into wordless gasps. The security officers swarmed, weapons drawn, radios crackling. Passengers scrambled back, phones already recording, the scene exploding across social media within seconds. "Don't move. Nobody move." The lead TSA officer's voice cracked with adrenaline. Mason raised his hand slowly, his military training overriding panic. He watched Frost refuse to leave Tommy's side. The dog's body curved protectively around the child. Grace's sobs grew louder as officers pulled her away, her eyes fixed on the spreading puddle of poison that should have been their escape. The heroin package lay exposed, its markings clear. Mason's blood went cold. He knew those symbols, that packaging. It was the same signature from his last mission, the network they'd never fully uncovered. Within minutes, the DEA arrived. Grace broke completely, confessing through tears about the suicide plan, about the desperate final trip, about the letters. She pulled crumpled pages from her pocket. Blackmail, threats, someone claiming to know how Robert really died. The writing mentioned details only someone from Robert's unit would know. Mason studied the letters over an officer's shoulder, his jaw tightening. Hunter Blackwood. The signature was hidden in military code, but Mason recognized it. The same man now walking through the terminal in a $1,000 suit, credentials in hand, offering to help as a concerned pharmaceutical executive who happened to be in the airport. Frost wouldn't leave Tommy. Even as paramedics tried to examine the boy, the dog planted himself between them and the child, not aggressive but immovable. Tommy's hand stayed buried in the white fur. His eyes, for the first time, Grace could remember, focused and present. The cameras captured everything: the war dog who'd saved a child, the mother who'd nearly killed them both, the veteran shaking with memories, and the executive whose smile never quite reached his eyes. The story was already viral, already beyond containment. But the real story, the one about dead soldiers and living ghosts, about a network trading in misery and a dog who remembered what everyone else tried to forget, that story was just beginning. The interrogation room at Meridian Police Station smelled of burnt coffee and fear. Grace Mitchell sat across from two DEA agents, her hands wrapped around a paper cup she couldn't stop crushing. 4 hours had passed since the airport, since her plan had shattered like that vial on the terminal floor. Tommy was with Child Services in the next room. She could hear Frost's occasional bark, the dog still refusing to leave the boy's side. The agents waited while she gathered courage to speak the truth she'd been running from for 2 years. Robert didn't die in a training accident, she finally whispered. He was murdered. I know because the man who did it has been telling me exactly how it happened. She pulled more letters from her bag, pages she'd hidden even from herself. Hunter Blackwood. He was in Robert's unit. He's been blackmailing me for 18 months. First, it was just money Robert owed him, he said. Gambling debts from deployment. I paid what I could. Then 6 months ago, everything changed. He wanted me to transport packages through the hospital. Said if I didn't, he'd make sure everyone knew Robert was dirty, that Tommy would lose his benefits, that I'd lose my job. The agents exchanged glances as Grace continued, her voice stronger now. The packages went to families with special needs children, always families with autistic kids, always military families. I thought it was medications at first, off-label treatments maybe, but then I saw the manifest last month. She pulled out her phone, showing photos she'd risked everything to take. 23 children in the last year, all between ages 4 and 7, all nonverbal autistic, all disappeared within weeks of the deliveries. Their families were told they'd been accepted into revolutionary treatment programs overseas, but Hunter let something slip once. When he was drunk, he called them spare parts. The senior agent leaned forward. Are you saying this is organ trafficking? Grace's voice broke. The children who can't speak, who can't tell anyone what's happening to them, they're perfect victims. No one questions when they disappear into specialized care. The families are desperate, drowning in debt. They believe they're sending their kids to get help. Hunter has this whole network. Doctors who certify the kids need experimental treatment abroad. Travel documents that look legitimate. Everything routed through his pharmaceutical company as medical transport. He said if I didn't help, Tommy would be next. Said he'd make it look like I agreed to it. That I'd signed papers. Today was supposed to be my last delivery. The heroin in the diaper bag, I didn't even know it was there. Hunter Blackwood arrived at the police station like he owned it, which in some ways, he did. His Armani suit caught the fluorescent lights as he presented credentials to the desk sergeant CEO of Blackwood Pharmaceuticals, former Army captain, current board member of 3 veteran charities. His concern seemed genuine as he asked about the terrible incident at the airport. He'd been on his way to a conference, he explained, when he heard about a fellow veteran in trouble. Mason Walker was an old friend from Afghanistan. Could he possibly help? They led him into the observation room where Mason stood watching Grace's interrogation through one-way glass. Hunter's hand landed on Mason's shoulder with practiced familiarity. "Rough morning, brother. That dog of yours still causing problems." The casual cruelty in his voice made Mason's fists clench. Hunter continued, studying the scene beyond the glass. "That poor woman. PTSD does terrible things to people, makes them see conspiracies everywhere. I heard she's been stealing drugs from the hospital. Tragic what grief can do to a person's mind." "Cut the act," Mason growled. "I recognize the packaging on that heroin. Same markers your unit was investigating before Robert died." Hunter's smile turned cold. "Memory's a funny thing, Mason, especially for someone with your condition. How many medications are you on now?" 5, 6. Hard to trust what you remember when your brain's that scrambled. Like that last day in Kandahar. You remember that clearly." He pulled out his phone, swiping to a video file. "Because I have footage that might help refresh your memory. From Daniel's helmet cam. The Army never released it to you. Did they? Too painful, they said. But I kept a copy. Professional courtesy." The video started, and Mason's world tilted. Daniel's voice, young and confident, filled the small room. The footage showed Frost alerting. The dog's behavior textbook perfect for detecting explosives. His son's camera turned to Mason, and there he was. 3 years younger, but already broken. Screaming at Daniel about respect, about following orders, about not trusting that damn dog over your commanding officer. The argument escalated. Daniel wanted to investigate Frost's alert. Mason ordered him to stay in formation. The last words between them were cruel, Mason calling his son a coward. Daniel calling his father a drunk who'd lost his edge. "He went to prove you wrong," Hunter said quietly, stopping the video before the explosion. "Died trying to show his father that Frost was right. That bomb killed 6 kids in that orphanage too. All because you stopped trusting the one thing that never let you down. And here's the beautiful irony, Frost still loves you, still protects you. Even though you got his real handler killed." Mason's legs gave out. He slumped against the wall. 3 years of suppressed truth crushing him like a physical weight. The guilt he'd carried crystallized into something sharper, not just that Daniel died, but that he'd died believing his father thought him a coward. That Frost had tried to save them all. And Mason's pride had killed his son. The dog had stayed loyal despite Mason being the reason Daniel wasn't coming home. His medication-numbed brain had let him forget the argument, forget his culpability, forget everything except the pain. The door burst open. Walter Walker stood there, his white hair disheveled, eyes wide with confusion. "Mason, they called me, said you were in trouble. I came as fast as—" He stopped, seeing Hunter. Recognition flickered across his weathered face. "Mr. Blackwood. What are you doing here?" The temperature in the room dropped. Mason looked between his father and Hunter, understanding dawning like nausea. "You know him." Walter's mouth opened and closed, his early-stage Alzheimer's making the connection slower. He's from the Memorial Fund. He's been helping with Daniel's monument. Generous man. Gave $20,000 last month." The old man's face brightened with gratitude. "Going to have a beautiful stone. Son, tallest in the veterans section. Daniel would be proud." "Dad," Mason's voice cracked. "What did you do for that money?" Just signed some papers. Helped move some medical supplies. Mr. Blackwood said it was for sick children, veterans kids who needed medicine. I used the van from the home, delivered packages to families." Walter's confusion deepened as he sensed the tension. Did I do something wrong? The children needed help. Their families were so grateful. Some of them were going overseas for treatment. Mr. Blackwood arranged everything." Hunter's smile widened as he watched Mason process the betrayal. His own father, in his confusion and grief, had become a cog in the machine trafficking children. "Your dad's been very helpful," Hunter said smoothly. Those Alzheimer's medications are expensive, aren't they? Walter, good thing the Memorial Fund could help with those too. Grace watched through the doorway, seeing her own story reflected in the old man's confusion. They were all the same desperate people trying to save what they loved, manipulated by someone who understood their pain because he'd lived it too. She thought of Hunter's son, dead at 6 from treatable illness, insurance denied, appeals rejected. Everyone in this room had lost a child to different wars, and Hunter had weaponized their grief into something monstrous. The families, Walter mumbled, pulling crumpled receipts from his pocket. I kept records. Mr. Blackwood said not to, but I always keep records. Habit from the service. The papers scattered on the floor, addresses, dates, names of children, 23 deliveries over 6 months, 23 families who'd trusted a fellow veteran, a grieving grandfather who thought he was helping, 23 children who'd vanished into Hunter's network. Mason looked at the papers, at his father's shaking hands, at Hunter's satisfied expression. Frost's barking echoed from the next room, still protecting Tommy, still loyal despite everything. The truth was all here now, the murders, the trafficking, the exploitation of grief. But Hunter had been right about one thing. Everyone in this room was broken, guilty, compromised. The question was what they'd do with that truth, and whether any redemption was possible for those who'd failed the ones they loved most. The holding cell at Meridian Police Station wasn't built for comfort, but Grace Mitchell and Mason Walker found themselves sharing more than just the cold metal bench. They sat at opposite ends at first, two strangers united only by catastrophe. But as the hours passed and the lawyers delayed, their walls began to crumble. Grace spoke first, her voice raw from crying. Tommy hasn't smiled in 2 years, not once. The doctor said it was part of his condition, emotional disconnection. They called it. But when your dog touched him. She trailed off, looking at Mason with something between wonder and confusion. He smiled. He reached out. For 2 years. I've been dying inside watching my son disappear. And your dog brought him back in 30 seconds. Mason studied his scarred hands. Frost knows things. Always has. In Afghanistan, he saved our unit 17 times. Could smell IEDs from 50 yards. But the 18th time, his voice caught. I stopped trusting him. Thought I knew better. My son died because I wouldn't listen to a dog who'd never been wrong. We're both idiots, Grace said suddenly, surprising herself with a bitter laugh. I was going to kill us both rather than ask for help. You ignored the one thing that could have saved your son. And we're sitting here feeling sorry for ourselves while Hunter's still out there, still taking children. Mason looked at her, really looked at her. This young mother who'd been pushed to the edge, who'd stolen poison to escape a world that had taken everything. He saw himself in her exhausted eyes. The lawyers want us to make deals, testify against each other. Hunter's probably counting on it. Divide and conquer. Basic military strategy. Then we don't divide, Grace said, her nurse's pragmatism cutting through. I have medical knowledge, access to hospital records. You have military training, veteran contacts. Frost has whatever supernatural ability makes him know things. And Tommy. She paused, thinking of her son still clutching the dog in the next room. Tommy needs that dog. And maybe Frost needs him too. They shook hands. A partnership born of desperation and a shared understanding that the system had failed them both. When their lawyers arrived, separate counsels arguing separate strategies, Grace and Mason presented a united front. They would cooperate fully, but only together. They would find the missing children, but only their way. The DEA agents, frustrated but recognizing they needed these broken people, agreed. The investigation's scope staggered them. Grace had kept meticulous records at the hospital, documenting every suspicious request, every unusual prescription pattern. The data painted a horrific picture. In 18 months, 43 military families with autistic children had been approached through VA support groups. 23 had accepted treatment opportunities abroad. None had returned. The families received monthly video updates clearly staged, the same backdrop, children who never quite looked at the camera right. After 6 months, the updates stopped. The families were told the children had been relocated to a more intensive program with no contact allowed during adjustment period. Mason's veteran network provided different pieces. 3 soldiers from his old unit had killed themselves in the past year. All had autistic children who disappeared into programs. Their suicide notes mentioned failing their kids, not being able to afford care, choosing death over watching their children suffer. But Mason found discrepancies. Each soldier had received large payments weeks before their deaths. Each had been visited by Hunter Blackwood. Each had discovered something about where their children really went. "He's not just trafficking them," Grace said, studying medical transport records she'd accessed through hospital connections. "Look at these flight manifests. Medical equipment consistent with organ preservation. Surgical teams traveling on the same flights. Immunosuppressant drugs in quantities that make no sense for pediatric psychiatric treatment." She pulled up mortality statistics from the destination countries. Sudden spike in successful pediatric organ transplants, hearts, lungs, kidneys, all from donors aged 4 to 7, all matching our timeline. The veteran community Mason reached out to painted an even darker picture. Support groups had been infiltrated. Desperate families identified through VA psychiatric records illegally accessed but impossible to prove. Parents already on edge, already feeling like failures, already considering suicide. Hunter's people would approach with sympathy, understanding, solutions. They knew exactly what to say because they'd read the therapy session notes. They knew which families would break, which would accept any hope offered, which would never ask questions. "The beautiful tragedy," one veteran told Mason over encrypted phone, "is that we already feel guilty about everything. Our kids' conditions, our PTSD affecting them, not being able to provide. Hunter just had to push us a little further over the edge we were already standing on." And Tommy's transformation happened gradually, then suddenly. For 3 days, while Grace and Mason built their case, the boy stayed with Frost under protective custody. Child Services tried to separate them, but Tommy's reaction, screaming, self-harm, complete regression forced them to reconsider. So the war dog and the silent child became roommates in a safe house, 2 damaged souls finding something in each other. The breakthrough came during a thunderstorm. Tommy, who'd always been terrified of loud noises, pressed against Frost as the thunder rolled. The dog, trained to stay calm under artillery fire, remained perfectly still. Tommy's hand found Frost's ear, fingers tracing the scarred edges. And then, clear as morning, he spoke, "Dog hurt too." The social worker nearly dropped her coffee. 3 words. Subject, verb, acknowledgement of another's pain. Tommy had shown empathy, recognition, connection. Within hours, he was saying more. Frost sad. Want mama? Thunder scary. Each word fought its way out like he was remembering a language he'd forgotten. Grace sobbed when she heard the recording. Her son wasn't gone. He'd been locked inside himself, and somehow this battle-scarred dog had found the key. The therapist had theories, something about the dog's calm presence, about trauma recognizing trauma, about nonverbal communication transcending human limitations. But Grace knew it was simpler. Frost had chosen Tommy. In all the chaos, all the violence, the dog had seen a child who needed protection and had simply decided, this one is mine now. The same loyalty that had kept him by Mason's side despite Mason's failures now extended to Tommy. The boy responded to that absolute, unconditional acceptance in ways no therapy had achieved. Hunter's response was swift and vicious. Walter was attacked at the veteran's home, made to look like a fall, but the bruises suggested otherwise. Mason's cabin was ransacked, his medications replaced with sugar pills, causing withdrawal symptoms that nearly hospitalized him. Grace's apartment was broken into, Tommy's medical records stolen, photos of her son left with eyes scratched out. The message was clear: stop investigating or lose everything. But Hunter miscalculated. He thought broken people would break further. Instead, the threats galvanized them. Mason moved into the safe house with Grace and Tommy. Walter, Confused but understanding danger, cooperated fully with police. The veteran network, tired of losing brothers and sisters to suicide, began sharing information openly. Families who'd lost children started comparing notes, finding patterns, realizing they'd been targeted. Then Hunter made his real mistake. He tried to take Tommy himself. It happened at a supervised visit to the park. Tommy needed sunlight, movement, normality. Grace was there, along with 2 DEA agents and Mason with Frost. The snatch team was professional 3 men, military trained, approaching from different angles. But they hadn't counted on Frost's memory. The dog recognized one of them from Afghanistan, from Hunter's unit. The growl started low, primal, a warning that made everyone freeze. Tommy, in a moment of impossible clarity, pointed at the approaching men and said loudly, "Bad men! Frost says bad men!" The agents reacted instantly, but the kidnappers were already retreating. One dropped a phone in his escape. On it, messages from Hunter, detailed plans for Tommy's acquisition, mentions of a buyer in Singapore who needed a heart and lungs, who didn't care about the source as long as the tissue matched. Grace vomited when she read it. Her son hadn't been random. He'd been selected, tested, matched to a dying child whose wealthy parents would pay millions for organs. "He was never going to let us live," she whispered. "Even if I'd done everything he asked, Tommy was always the product." The dropped phone provided something else: GPS data. Hunter kept his inventory at a warehouse complex outside the city, abandoned industrial site bought through shell companies. Satellite images showed unusual activity: medical vans, refrigerated trucks, buses with blacked-out windows. The FBI wanted to raid immediately, but Mason stopped them. "You don't understand," he explained. "Hunter's paranoid and smart. He'll have contingencies. The moment federal agents show up, those kids are dead. He'd rather destroy evidence than get caught." Mason studied the satellite images with a soldier's eye. "But he also has patterns. Military habits, guard rotations every 4 hours, supply deliveries at dawn. And look," he pointed to heat signatures. "Those aren't just guards. Those are veterans. I recognize the movement patterns, the formations. He's using former soldiers as security." Grace added her medical insight. "These heat signatures here, they're different. Smaller, clustered. That's got to be the children. But this section shows medical equipment, operating room temperature controls. Oh God, he's not just holding them. He's harvesting from them while they're there." The moral weight of their discovery crushed them. 20 children, maybe more, being held in conditions designed to keep them alive but docile. Parents who thought their kids were in treatment programs overseas. Veterans so desperate they'd become guards in a concentration camp for children. And Hunter at the center, turning grief into profit, using their collective trauma as camouflage for atrocity. The warehouse reconnaissance revealed the final, horrific detail. Walter, in his confused state, had actually been inside during one of his deliveries. He remembered now: children in medical beds, IV drips keeping them sedated, charts on walls with blood types and tissue matches. He'd thought it was a treatment facility. The nurses had been so kind, so professional. One had even said, "These children are giving the gift of life." Walter hadn't understood then. Now, trembling with realization, he whispered, "I helped them. God forgive me. I delivered children to that place." The guards weren't monsters, that was the worst part. Mason recognized 3 of them through binoculars. Sergeant Mitchell, no relation to Grace, who'd lost his daughter to leukemia. Corporal Stevens, whose autistic son had been shot by police during a meltdown. Private First Class Cooper, barely 25, who'd come home from Syria to find his family destroyed by medical debt from his brother's autism care. All good soldiers once, all destroyed by loss, all convinced by Hunter that they were part of something meaningful, that sacrificing terminal children could save viable ones. "He picks us because we're already broken," Mason said quietly. "We've already failed our children. We're already considering suicide. He just gives us a reason to make our failure mean something, turn our guilt into purpose, even if that purpose is evil." Grace pulled up medical records she'd stolen before leaving the hospital. But some of these children aren't even sick. They're just inconvenient, nonverbal, difficult, expensive. Their parents are convinced they're better off in specialized care, but really they're just tired, broke, desperate for any solution. She found Tommy's assessment in Hunter's files. Look, my son was marked as optimal candidate, multiple organ compatibility, young enough for maximum yield, mother showing signs of breaking. He'd been watching us for months, waiting for me to be desperate enough. The plan formed slowly. They couldn't trust the FBI fully. Hunter had connections everywhere. They couldn't storm the warehouse, the children would die. They couldn't negotiate, Hunter had nothing to lose. But they had something Hunter didn't expect, a network of broken people who'd found each other. Veterans tired of losing brothers. Families who'd lost children. Medical professionals horrified by their unwitting participation. And at the center, an old war dog who remembered every scent, every face, every betrayal from Afghanistan to now. Mason looked at the team assembling around them, a nurse driven to attempted murder-suicide, a confused grandfather who'd been an unwitting accomplice, a nonverbal child learning to speak, a dog held together by scar tissue and loyalty, and himself, a father who'd gotten his son killed through stubborn pride. Hunter had chosen his victims well, picking the damaged and desperate. He just hadn't considered that broken things, when properly aligned, can still be strong. That grief, transformed into purpose, becomes determination. That love, the desperate, flawed, messy love of parents who'd failed, might be enough to save children they'd never met. Tomorrow night, they would move on the warehouse. No agencies, no official channels, just broken people trying to save other broken people's children. Mason spent the evening cleaning his rifle, the first time he'd touched it since Daniel's death. Grace prepared medical supplies, knowing children would need immediate care. Walter, in a moment of clarity, provided hand-drawn maps of the warehouse interior from his deliveries. Tommy, clutching frost, said his new favorite word over and over: help, help, help. Whether he meant they needed help or wanted to help others, no one was sure. Maybe both. Maybe that's all any of them were doing, crying for help while trying to provide it. The warehouse waited, full of children whose parents thought them saved or lost, guarded by soldiers who thought themselves damned, run by a man who'd turned his son's death into an industry of death. Tomorrow, they would find out if love could overcome that much darkness, if redemption was possible for those who'd failed so completely. Frost slept beside Tommy, occasionally whimpering from dreams of explosions, while the boy's hand never left the dog's scarred fur, both finding peace in contact with another wounded soul. The planning happened in the basement of a closed VFW hall. 23 veterans gathered around a table covered in hand-drawn maps and satellite photos. Mason stood at the head, his bearing military despite 3 years of civilian decay. These weren't soldiers anymore, they were mechanics, truck drivers, unemployed fathers drowning in disability claims. But they'd all lost children to Hunter's network, through suicide, trafficking, or despair. That loss united them more than any oath ever had. No police, Mason stated flatly. Hunter owns half the department through donations and blackmail. The moment we involve official channels, those kids are dead. He pointed to the warehouse layout Walter had sketched with shaking hands. 20 children confirmed inside. Medical wing here, holding cells here. Guard post at corners, rotating every 4 hours. All veterans, all armed, all believing they're doing necessary evil. A former Marine spoke up. Rules of engagement. Minimal force on guards, their victims too. But Hunter doesn't leave that building. Mason's eyes were stone. Not alive, not in custody. He has too much money, too many lawyers, too many connections. He'll be out in a year, and more children will die. Grace had transformed the hall's kitchen into a makeshift medical station. IV bags, trauma kits, medications stolen from her final shift. Some of these children have been operated on. Partial organ removal, kidneys, liver sections, tissue they can survive without but barely. They'll need immediate stabilization. Her hands moved efficiently, hiding the tremor underneath. "I'll need at least 3 people with medical training." "I can help," said a voice from the corner. Sarah Chen, combat medic, discharged after her daughter disappeared into Hunter's program 6 months ago. 2 other veterans raised hands, both had EMT training from civilian life. Grace nodded, grateful for competent help in what would be chaos. The argument about Tommy lasted an hour. The 4-year-old refused to leave Frost, screaming with a fury that shocked everyone. When they tried to separate them, the boy bit a social worker hard enough to draw blood, then spoke his clearest sentence yet, "Frost needs me." The dog, for his part, wouldn't move without the child. They'd become a unit, bonded by something deeper than training or therapy. Finally, Mason made the call. Tommy would come but stay in the van with 2 guards. Frost would lead the assault, then return to the boy. It was insane, but everything about this was insane. They moved at 2 a.m., 3 civilian vehicles approaching from different directions. No military precision, just desperate people trying to remember training from wars they'd tried to forget. Mason rode with Grace, both silent, checking weapons they'd hoped never to hold again. Frost sat in the back, Tommy's small hand gripping his collar. The boy had been repeating the same phrase for hours. "Save friends, save friends." Whether he understood what was happening or was simply echoing adult anxiety, no one knew. The warehouse squatted in darkness, a monument to industrial decay hiding modern horror. Through night vision binoculars borrowed from a veteran who'd kept his gear, Mason counted 6 guards. He recognized 2 immediately. Corporal Stevens at the north entrance, the man who'd taught Daniel to field strip a rifle. Sergeant Mitchell at the south, who'd carried wounded through Kandahar's streets. Good men once, broken men now. Frost moved first, slipping through shadows with instinct no training could provide. The dog remembered this, sneaking through enemy territory, every sense alert. But this wasn't Afghanistan, and these weren't foreign enemies. These were brothers who'd lost their way. The dog paused at the fence, nose working, then gave a soft whine. Mason understood immediately. Blood, recent, children's blood. The plan unraveled within minutes. They'd cut through the fence, Frost leading, when lights exploded across the compound. Hunter's voice echoed through speakers they hadn't noticed. "Welcome, Mason. I've been expecting you. Did you really think I wouldn't recognize your tactical pattern? You always did favor the northern approach." Doors opened. More guards emerged, not 6, but 12, all armed, all conflicted faces Mason recognized from better days. Then Hunter appeared, and everything stopped. He held Walter by the arm, the confused old man wearing what every veteran recognized: a suicide vest. Military grade, enough explosive to level the building. Walter's eyes darted wildly, Alzheimer's making him unable to grasp the danger. "Mason, is that you? Son, I got lost. This nice man said he'd help me find Daniel." "Hello, Dad," Mason's voice cracked. "Everything's okay. Just stay calm." Hunter smiled, the expression poison on his face. "Here's the situation, old friend. 20 children inside. Your father here. You can't save both. The vest has a dead man's switch I let go. Everyone dies. Timer's set for 15 minutes. You can evacuate the children or disarm the bomb. Not both." He pulled Walter closer. "Your choice. Save strangers' kids or save your father. Let's see if you make a better decision than you did with Daniel." The warehouse door opened. Grace gasped. Through the entrance, she could see them rows of medical beds, children lying still, IV drips maintaining their silence. Some had surgical dressings. One girl, maybe 5, was missing a kidney, drainage tubes still attached. A boy Tommy's age lay unconscious, chest marked for morning surgery. 20 young souls caught between life and organ harvest, their parents believing them saved while they waited to be parted out to the highest bidder. Mason stood paralyzed. The night split into past and present, Daniel's voice echoing. Frost's warning ignored. Another impossible choice with lives hanging in balance. His hands shook. The rifle felt wrong, too heavy, too familiar. Around him, veterans faced off against veterans, nobody wanting to fire first, everyone understanding they'd all been manipulated into this moment. 10 minutes, Hunter announced, checking his watch. Though I doubt your father understands what's happening. The Alzheimer's is quite advanced. He keeps asking for his grandson. Grace started toward the children, but guards blocked her path. Please, she begged Sergeant Mitchell. You have a daughter. You know what it's like. These are somebody's babies. Mitchell's rifle trembled. They're dying anyway. That's what Mr. Blackwood said. Terminal cases. Their sacrifice saves others. But his voice held no conviction. Just the hollow echo of lies repeated until they resembled truth. Look at them, Grace screamed. Do they look terminal to you? 8 minutes. Mason remained frozen, his mind cycling through calculations with no solution. Save the children. Lose his father. Save his father. Children die. Hunter had crafted perfect cruelty, forcing Mason to relive his greatest failure. The guards watched, unsure, waiting for someone to make a decision that would damn them all. Then Frost moved. The dog had been creeping forward. Tommy forgotten in the van. Every instinct focused on the bomb. Mason saw it happen like slow motion, the German shepherd's muscles coiling, the leap impossibly high, jaws clamping on the vest's control mechanism. Hunter jerked back, trying to maintain his grip on the dead man's switch, but Frost's 70 pounds of momentum was too much. They crashed together, man and dog and confused elder, a tangle of violence and desperation. The explosion wasn't the vest that stayed miraculously intact. It was Hunter's pistol, fired in panic, the bullet tearing through Frost's shoulder and into his abdomen. The dog's yelp cut through everything, but his jaws didn't release. He bit harder, deeper, until the mechanism sparked and failed, the vest powering down with a dying whine. Walter fell clear, unharmed but terrified. Hunter scrambled for his gun. That's when Tommy's voice shattered the night. Frost, hurt, help, Frost. Not 3 words, but a complete thought, screamed with desperate clarity. The boy had left the van, was running toward his dog with speed nobody knew he possessed. 4 years old, autistic, supposedly disconnected from the world, and he moved like his soul was on fire. The guard stood stunned. This wasn't a vegetative child, a spare parts donor. This was a boy terrified for his friend. Hunter's expression shifted from control to confusion to something like recognition. His own son had been nonverbal until the end, had died never saying daddy, never expressing love except through touch. Seeing Tommy's anguish, hearing his voice, Hunter hesitated. That hesitation was enough. Mason's paralysis broke. He moved with muscle memory, rifle butt connecting with Hunter's temple, dropping him cold, around the compound. Guards lowered weapons. The spell broken. Some started crying. Others ran. Sergeant Mitchell dropped his rifle entirely and ran toward the warehouse, shouting about getting the children out. The moral weight they'd been carrying, the lies they'd told themselves, crumbled under a child's pure love for a dying dog. Grace rushed inside, Sarah Chen beside her, finding horrors and hope mixed. 3 children were past saving organs already harvested, machines maintaining bodily functions for final extractions. But 17 lived, drugged but whole, waiting for surgeries scheduled at dawn. They worked frantically, disconnecting IVs, carrying small bodies to vehicles. Parents had been told their children were in Switzerland, in Mexico, in experimental programs. Instead, they'd been 3 miles from home, waiting to be disassembled for profit. Veterans who'd been guards became rescuers. Their shame transformed into desperate action. They knew every child's name, had been told their stories, their diagnoses, the reasons their sacrifice was necessary. Now they carried them like precious cargo, whispering apologies to unconscious ears. One Marine who'd guarded the door for 6 months carried out twin boys, sobbing that they looked like his nephews. Walter, freed from the vest, crawled to Frost. The dog lay in spreading blood. Tommy's hands pressed against wounds too large for such small fingers to stop. The old man's confusion cleared for a moment, and he pulled off his shirt, pressing it against the worst bleeding. Good boy, he whispered. Good boy. You saved us all. Mason knelt beside them, his father, the child who'd found his voice, and the dog who'd never stopped trying to save everyone. Frost's eyes found his, and in them was no accusation, no blame for Daniel, no anger for failures, just the steady loyalty that had survived war, loss, betrayal, and now perhaps would not survive love. The dog's tail gave a single weak wag, his duty finally completely done. Sirens approached not the corrupt locals but FBI units Grace had secretly contacted through a friend at the DEA, teams cleared of Hunter's influence. They'd waited for confirmation the children were safe before moving. Professional voices called for medical support, crime scene containment, witness protection. But at the center of chaos sat a strange family, a broken soldier, his confused father, a desperate nurse, an autistic child finding words through grief, and a dog whose blood drew them all together. Stay, Tommy said clearly, his hand on Frost's heart, feeling it slow. Please stay. The warehouse lights blazed as investigators entered, finding evidence of horror beyond imagination. Hunter stirred, concussed but alive, to find himself surrounded by federal agents who'd been building a case for 2 years, waiting for one break in his perfect armor. That break lay bleeding on the concrete, a dog who'd remembered every scent from Afghanistan, who'd recognized Hunter's evil because he'd smelled it before, in another desert, in another war. The children began waking in transport vans, crying for parents who'd been told they were receiving revolutionary treatment. 17 families would receive impossible phone calls their children were alive, damaged, but breathing, coming home from a nightmare they'd never known existed. 3 families would learn a different truth, would have to decide whether knowing how their children died was better than believing they'd simply slipped away in specialized care. All would live with the guilt of trusting too easily, of letting desperation make them blind, but that was for tomorrow. Tonight, under industrial lights and surrounded by crime scene tape, a dog fought to breathe while a child spoke for the first time in sentences, begging him to live. Frost brave, Frost good, Frost my friend, don't go, don't go. Each word cost Tommy everything, years of silence breaking like a dam. Mason held his father, who held the child, who held the dog, and Grace worked with desperate efficiency, her stolen medical supplies the only thing keeping Frost's heart beating as they waited for the veterinary ambulance that might not come in time. The veterinary hospital's fluorescent lights turned everything gray skin, walls, hope. Doctor. Patricia Reeves emerged from surgery after 4 hours, her scrubs soaked with blood that belonged to a dog who'd saved 17 children. Her expression told Mason everything before she spoke. The bullet fragmented. 1 piece lodged near his spine, 2 more in his liver. There's extensive internal bleeding. If he were younger, maybe. But with his previous injuries, the scar tissue, his age. She paused, gathering professorial distance. 10% chance, and that's optimistic. The next 12 hours will tell. Tommy hadn't moved from the observation window, his small palm pressed against the glass, watching Frost's chest rise and fall with mechanical assistance. The boy who'd been silent for years now whispered constantly prayers, promises, pleas in a voice raw from sudden use. Frost strong. Frost wake up. Tommy here. Tommy waiting. Grace tried to lead him away for food, rest, anything, but he screamed with such primal anguish that she stopped trying. The child would keep vigil until the end, whatever end came. Mason sat in the hallway, reliving another vigil 3 years ago, waiting for news about Daniel that would never be good. The same fluorescent hell, the same plastic chairs, the same weight crushing his chest. But this time, Walter sat beside him, the old man's confusion clearing in waves. I helped him, Walter whispered during one lucid moment. That monster. I delivered children to him. How do I live with that? Same way I live with getting Daniel killed, Mason replied, his voice empty. You just keep breathing. Grace had been suspended from her nursing license within hours of the warehouse raid, using stolen medications, participating in vigilante action, abandoning her post. The board had endless reasons. She'd saved 17 children with those stolen supplies, but bureaucracy didn't measure heroism against regulation. She sat filling out forms for Tommy's therapy, for witness protection, for a future she couldn't imagine. Every few minutes, she'd check on Frost, using her medical knowledge to read monitors, understanding better than most how each dropping number brought them closer to goodbye. In the federal holding facility, Hunter Blackwood was dying. The rifle butt to his temple had caused a subdural hematoma, and he'd refused surgery. Let it end, he'd told his lawyers. Now, with hours left, he'd asked to make a statement. The federal prosecutor sat beside his bed, recording every word. "Jacob was 6, Hunter began, his voice surprisingly clear for a man whose brain was bleeding. Autistic, like the children I took, but brilliant. He could name every star, knew how weather patterns worked, understood music like mathematics. Insurance called his therapy experimental. Denied everything. I sold my house, my car, everything. Still wasn't enough. He died in my arms, seizing, because we couldn't afford the anticonvulsants that might have saved him." He pulled out a worn photo, a boy with Hunter's eyes, smile bright despite the hospital gown. "I told myself I was balancing the scales. These children were suffering anyway. Their organs could save others, give meaning to meaningless loss. 1 child dies, 3 live. Simple math." His voice cracked. "But math doesn't account for souls. I became the insurance company I hated, deciding who deserved life." The prosecutor leaned forward. "The names. You promised names?" Hunter provided them all. 63 people across 5 states. Doctors who'd falsified diagnoses. Officials who'd approved false medical transports. Veterans who'd been guards. Drivers. Accomplices. The network was vast, built on desperation and justified by twisted utilitarian logic. Each name came with a story: another parent who'd lost a child, another family destroyed by medical debt, another person who'd chosen evil because good had failed them. Robert Mitchell, Hunter continued, and Grace, watching through one-way glass, tensed. He discovered the truth, threatened to expose everything. "I didn't kill him myself, hired someone who made it look accidental. His wife never needs to know that. Let her think he died training. Some truths serve no purpose." But Grace was already crying, finally knowing for certain what she'd suspected for 2 years. Hunter's breathing grew labored. "Mason was supposed to be recruited. After Daniel died, I thought he'd understand. Thought his grief would make him pliable. But he had that dog. That damn dog who remembered me from Kandahar, who knew what I'd become by scent alone." A bitter laugh turned into a cough. "Killed by a dog's loyalty. There's poetry in that." He died at 3:47 a.m., his last words a whispered apology to a son who'd been dead for 3 years. The prosecutor sat silent for a moment, then began making calls. 63 arrests to coordinate. 63 families to destroy with truth. The network would collapse. But its damage was permanent: children dead, organs harvested, families shattered by betrayal from those they'd trusted most. The media descended before dawn. Someone had leaked video from the warehouse: children in medical beds, surgical equipment. The horror laid bare. Within hours, it was international news. "Organ trafficking ring uses veteran network," screamed headlines. "Autistic children targeted for harvest." The nuance was lost. The desperation that drove good people to evil simplified into monster stories. Mason watched reporters interview experts who'd never met a grieving parent, never felt the weight of a child's death, never understood how thin the line between salvation and damnation could become. Tommy's face appeared on every channel: the autistic boy who'd saved the day, who'd found his voice through tragedy. Reporters camped outside the veterinary hospital, cameras ready to catch the moment of either miracle or loss. Grace tried to shield him, but their images were everywhere. The desperate mother who'd nearly committed murder-suicide. The soldier who'd ignored the warning that could have saved his son. The grandfather who'd delivered children to hell. Heroes and villains mixed into one broken family. Too complex for sound bites, but perfect for consumption. Several arrested veterans committed suicide rather than face trial. Sergeant Mitchell, who'd guarded the warehouse door, left a note. "I thought I was saving some by sacrificing others. I was wrong. Tell my daughter I loved her too much and not enough." Corporal Stevens hanged himself with his service medals attached to his chest. 3 more followed within a week. The damage spread like cancer, each arrest revealing another family's destruction, another soldier's fall from grace. Walter was charged with 63 counts of accessory to trafficking. His Alzheimer's made him incompetent to stand trial, but the damage was done. The veteran's home expelled him. His benefits were frozen pending investigation. Mason found his father sitting in the rain outside the hospital, confused about where he was, why he couldn't go home, why Daniel wasn't answering his calls. The man who'd survived Vietnam, who'd raised a son alone after his wife died, who'd tried to honor his grandson's memory, was reduced to a frightened elder with nowhere to go. Grace lost everything in 48 hours. Her nursing license revoked permanently. Her apartment lease terminated due to criminal activity. Tommy's disability benefits suspended pending investigation. The hospital where she'd worked for 8 years sent a bill for the stolen medications that had saved 17 children. Insurance companies canceled policies. Bank accounts frozen. The system she'd served turned on her with bureaucratic efficiency, punishing her for choosing children over protocol. Tommy understood none of it except that Frost was hurt and might not wake up. He stood at the observation window for 18 hours straight, his voice growing hoarse from constant talking. "Frost brave. Frost good boy. Tommy loves Frost. Wake up. Please wake up." The child who'd been diagnosed as emotionally disconnected poured out feelings with desperate intensity, as if words alone could hold death back. Grace watched her son's heart break in real time, wondering if finding his voice only to lose his friend was crueler than silence. The other children, those saved from the warehouse, faced different tragedies. 3 had organs already removed, facing lifetimes of dialysis, anti-rejection drugs, shortened lives. Their parents, who'd believed they were in treatment, had to process that they'd signed consent forms, had accepted money, had been complicit in their children's harm. Lawsuits flew in every direction. Families turned on each other. Marriages ended. 2 parents committed suicide, unable to live with their choices. At hour 11 of Frost's critical period, his heart stopped. Alarms screamed. "Doctor." Reeves rushed in with her team, compressions starting immediately. Tommy's scream was wordless, primal, the sound of a soul tearing. Mason held the boy back as they worked, feeling the child's agony mix with his own, with memories of Daniel's death, with every failure crystallizing into this moment. They got Frost back after 3 minutes, but the vet's expression was grim. The next arrest would be the last. The war dog's body was failing, his mission finally too much. The federal prosecutor arrived at the veterinary hospital at dawn, carrying a sealed evidence box that would shatter Mason's understanding of his son's death. Agent Sarah Kellerman had spent the night cataloging Hunter Blackwood's personal effects, finding something that couldn't wait for official channels. She found Mason in the hallway, hollow-eyed from watching Frost fight for each breath. Tommy still maintaining his window vigil, whispering prayers to a dog who might already be beyond hearing. "Mr. Walker, I'm sorry to intrude, but this was in Hunter's safe. It's addressed to you." She handed him an envelope, worn from handling, dated 3 years ago. Daniel's handwriting made Mason's hands shake. Inside, 3 pages of his son's careful script. The letter that should have arrived after the explosion but never did. "Dad," it began. "If you're reading this, things went wrong. But I need you to know I knew about the bomb. Frost warned us, like he always does. And I know you think I ignored you to prove something. That's not true. The orphanage had 43 children inside. Dad, 43 kids who didn't choose this war. I could have stayed in formation, followed your orders, let them die. But that's not who you raised me to be." Mason's vision blurred as he continued reading. "You taught me that courage isn't the absence of fear, it's doing what's right despite fear. You taught me that sometimes a soldier's duty is to disobey orders that would cause innocent deaths. I learned that from you, from your stories about refusing to fire on civilians in Afghanistan. I'm not going to check that orphanage to spite you. I'm going because you taught me that protecting innocent life matters more than protecting myself." The letter continued with devastating clarity. "I asked Captain Blackwood to take care of Frost if something happens. He's a good man who understands loss. His son is sick, and he's drowning trying to save him. Promise me you'll forgive yourself, Dad, for the drinking, the anger, the words we both said. I forgave you the moment I understood that your rage came from love, from fear of losing me, like you lost Mom. If I die today, I die as your son, proud of who you made me, even if you can't see it through your pain." The final paragraph destroyed Mason completely. Frost knows things we don't, sees dangers we miss. Trust him, Dad. When I'm gone, he'll be all you have left of me. Let him save you like he tried to save us today. I love you. I've always loved you. Even when we were screaming at each other, even when you called me a coward, even when I called you a drunk. Love doesn't die with anger. It just gets buried until tragedy digs it back up. Don't bury yourself with me. Live. Dad. That's an order from your son." Mason collapsed against the wall. 3 years of guilt revealed as tragic misunderstanding. Daniel had died a hero, not trying to prove his father wrong, but trying to live up to his father's teachings. Hunter had kept the letter, using it as leverage he'd never deployed, a final cruelty held in reserve. Or perhaps, in his twisted way, Hunter had been protecting Mason from a truth that would have destroyed him earlier, when he was too raw to survive it. Agent Kellerman waited until Mason could breathe again, then revealed the second revelation. "Mr. Walker, we've uncovered something larger. Hunter wasn't the architect, he was middle management. This goes higher, much higher." She produced classified documents, partially redacted but damning. Project Harvest was a Defense Department initiative, unofficial, black budget, but sanctioned. The theory was that children of veterans, especially those with disabilities, could serve as an organ reserve for wounded soldiers, a way to ensure our warriors always had compatible donors. The documentation was meticulous. Psychological profiles of veteran families likely to break, medical records of children with autism, Down syndrome, cerebral palsy conditions that made them expendable in some monster's calculation. Grace's husband, Robert, appeared throughout the files. He'd been an Army investigator who'd stumbled onto the program. His reports, ignored by superiors, grew increasingly desperate. His final report, dated a week before his death, stated simply, "They're going to kill me for this. Please protect Grace and Tommy." "Your husband was murdered by a CIA contractor," Kellerman told Grace, who'd joined them after hearing Mason's sobs. "Hunter arranged it, but the order came from Colonel James Morrison, Pentagon liaison for medical research. Robert had evidence that would have exposed everything: senators taking bribes, generals profiting from organ sales, an entire shadow industry built on sacrificing the weakest children of those who'd already sacrificed everything." Grace held the reports her husband had written. Seeing his desperate attempts to protect her, even as he knew death was coming, he'd tried to get them into witness protection, had been denied. He'd recorded conversations, sent evidence to journalists who'd been too frightened to publish. He'd fought alone against a system that had unlimited resources and no conscience. His last email to her, sent an hour before his death, had simply said, "Love you both, always." She'd thought it was routine. Now she understood it was goodbye. "How many?" Grace whispered. "How many children?" "Over 5 years, 300 confirmed, possibly more. Operations in 14 states. Always targeting military families. They had the medical records, the psychological profiles, the financial pressure points, and when parents started asking questions, they had veterans like Hunter to handle them. Soldiers trusted other soldiers. It was perfect evil wrapped in patriotic justification. The door burst open. Senator Marcus Webb entered, his face gray with exhaustion and something else, shame. Mason recognized him from Armed Services Committee hearings, but the man who entered looked broken, clutching a photo of a young boy. "My grandson was in that warehouse," he said without preamble. "Christopher, 7 years old, autistic. My daughter thought he was in Switzerland for treatment. She's military, Marines, served 2 tours. They targeted her because of me, because they knew I'd been investigating irregularities in veteran medical funding." Webb looked at each of them, then knelt, literally got on his knees in the hospital hallway. "I failed you all. I knew something was wrong. Reports crossing my desk that didn't add up. Children disappearing from VA family programs. I was building a case, moving carefully, trying not to alert them. I was too slow, too cautious. My caution nearly cost my grandson his life. Did cost other children theirs." He stood, aged a decade in moments. "But no more. I have emergency hearings scheduled, full immunity for any veteran who testifies. Complete medical coverage for all affected families, not VA hospitals. Real care, witness protection for anyone who needs it. And Mr. Walker," he looked at Mason directly, "your dog's medical bills, rehabilitation, whatever he needs, if he survives, it's covered. It's the least this country owes him." Webb pulled out his phone, showing a video from the warehouse raid. Christopher, his grandson, was one of the children carried out, unconscious but alive. The person carrying him was Sergeant Mitchell, the guard who'd dropped his weapon when Tommy screamed for Frost. "That man saved my grandson after being part of imprisoning him. I don't know how to process that contradiction, but I know justice has to account for it. These weren't monsters. They were desperate people manipulated by actual monsters hiding behind flags and uniforms." Grace found her voice. "It won't bring them back. The 3 children who died, the organs already taken, the families destroyed." "No," Webb agreed. "But we can stop it from happening again. The hearings will be public. Every name, every connection, every senator who looked away, every general who profited, it all comes out. Hunter Blackwood was a symptom. We're going after the disease." Through the observation window, Frost's monitors showed slight improvement. His heart rhythm had stabilized, though he remained critical. Tommy hadn't moved, still whispering to his friend. But something had changed in the child's voice, not just pleading now, but telling stories. Stories about what they'd do when Frost woke up, parks they'd visit, games they'd play, children they'd help. The boy was painting a future with words he'd only recently found, trying to give the dog reasons to fight. Mason stood with Daniel's letter pressed to his chest, watching his father's only friend fight death, surrounded by people the system had failed in every possible way. But they were still standing, still fighting, still believing that tomorrow could be different, even if today was ashes. The senator made calls, mobilizing resources. The agent continued documenting crimes that reached to the highest levels of government. Grace held her son's medical files, planning the therapy center she'd build when this was over. And at the center of it all, a dog who'd given everything for strangers' children clung to life, while a boy who'd found his voice through tragedy refused to let him go. 6 months had passed since the warehouse raid, and autumn painted the mountains around Meridian in shades of gold that reminded Mason of Afghanistan before the war turned everything gray. He stood on the porch of the house he now shared with Grace, watching Frost navigate the yard with careful steps. The dog's gait was different, slower, favoring his right side where the bullet had done permanent damage, but his eyes remained alert, his purpose undimmed. Tommy ran beside him, chattering constantly, the silence of 4 years replaced by endless questions and observations. "Frost, look, red leaf means winter coming. We need warm coat for you." The miracle wasn't just that Frost had survived 12 hours of critical surgery and 2 months of rehabilitation. It was that his near death had catalyzed something in Tommy that no therapy ever could. The boy called Mason Grandpa now, the word coming naturally as breathing. At first, Mason had corrected him, explained he wasn't really family, but Tommy had simply said, "You love me. That makes you Grandpa." The logic was flawless in its simplicity. Grace emerged from the house, her hand resting on her stomach where new life grew unexpected, unplanned, but undeniably wanted. The therapy center's construction had taken every penny from the settlement and Senator Webb's funding, but they'd managed. She watched her son teaching Frost a new game involving pine cones and specific patterns, the kind of systematic play that autism brought but now included joy. "Walter called," she said softly. "He's teaching literacy classes to 3 new inmates, all veterans from Hunter's network." Walter had pled guilty to avoid trial, accepting minimum security imprisonment with grace that surprised everyone. "I delivered children to hell," he'd said at sentencing. 3 years is nothing compared to what those families suffer. But the federal prison had become his mission field. He taught reading to inmates who'd never finished school, led discussions about moral injury, helped other veterans process the guilt that had driven them to Hunter's darkness. His Alzheimer's had stabilized with proper medication, the fog lifting enough for him to understand his actions and seek redemption through service. Daniel's Haven opened its doors on a crisp October morning. The therapy center built where an old VFW hall had stood. Grace had insisted on the name, despite Mason's protests. "Your son saved those children," she'd said. "His courage, his letter, his sacrifice, it all led to this." 22 children attended now, all survivors of trafficking or siblings of victims. The warehouse children came 3 times a week, their physical scars healing faster than emotional ones. But here, with Frost and 2 other therapy dogs, with veterans volunteering as mentors, with parents who understood trauma, they slowly remembered how to be children. Frost had become the center's heartbeat. Despite his injuries, he worked 4 hours daily, letting children who'd never spoken whisper secrets in his ears, allowing those who feared touch to bury their faces in his fur. He'd developed an uncanny ability to identify children in crisis, often arriving at their side before anyone noticed distress. One girl, kidney transplant scars still pink, had been found by Frost during a panic attack, the dog's presence calming her enough to prevent self-harm. He wore a service medal now, presented by Senator Webb, though Tommy insisted the real medal was the flower crown he made fresh each morning. The volunteer staff was entirely veterans, many from Hunter's network who'd chosen cooperation over incarceration. Sergeant Mitchell, serving weekends as part of his plea deal, had become the center's most dedicated volunteer. He'd sold his house to pay restitution to victims' families, lived in a trailer behind the center, and spent every free moment helping children he'd once guarded as prisoners. "Can't undo what I did," he'd tell Mason during late-night conversations. "But maybe I can prevent another father from falling that far." Christmas Eve arrived with unusual warmth, allowing the center's celebration to spill onto the lawn. 43 children attended, some patients, some siblings, some simply neighborhood kids drawn by the joy. Tommy stood on a makeshift stage, wearing the Christmas sweater Grace had knitted, Frost lying at his feet. The boy who'd been silent until 6 months ago now sang Silent Night in a voice clear as winter air. Parents wept. Veterans who'd forgotten gentleness remembered. Even Walter, given special dispensation to attend, stood in shackles and cried as his honorary grandson's voice filled the space where so much darkness had lived. Mason held Grace as their unborn child kicked, watching Tommy finish his song and immediately dropped to hug Frost, whispering, "Good job watching me." The dog's tail wagged, slow but steady, above them. Daniel's photo watched from the wall, not a memorial to loss, but a reminder that love transcends death, that courage can bloom from tragedy, that broken people can still save each other. The center's motto, painted by Tommy in careful letters, stretched across the main room: "Love heals, dogs help, tomorrow comes." As snow began to fall, Frost lifted his head, watching the flakes with the same attention he'd once given to detecting bombs. But now he watched for beauty, not danger. Tommy laughed, trying to catch snowflakes on his tongue, calling for Frost to try. The old soldier dog, scarred and slow but still serving, stood and joined the boy in this simple joy. Around them, children who'd nearly died for their organs played with veterans who'd nearly sold their souls. Grace's hand found Mason's, Her pregnancy a promise that life continues despite death's best efforts. Walter, teaching another inmate to read, looked through the window and smiled. This was redemption, not erasure of sin, but transformation of pain into purpose, guilt into grace, silence into song. The story of Mason, Grace, Tommy, and Frost teaches us that family isn't defined by blood, but by choice. The choice to stay when leaving would be easier, to love when hate would be justified, to forgive when anger would be understandable. Mason found a son in Tommy. Grace found a father in Mason. And Tommy found his voice through a dog who refused to abandon him. They were strangers brought together by tragedy, yet they became more family to each other than many who share DNA. Gratitude runs deeper than happiness. Mason was grateful for Daniel's letter that revealed his son's heroism. Grace was grateful for the poison that didn't take her son's life. Tommy was grateful for a dog who saw him as worthy of protection. Even Walter, imprisoned and disgraced, was grateful for the chance to teach others, to prevent one more father from falling into darkness. Sometimes what we're most grateful for are the disasters that didn't happen, the mistakes that led to miracles, the wounds that taught us how to heal others. True family stands guard over each other's broken places until they become strong places. Have you ever witnessed someone being immediately judged as dangerous or wrong, only to discover they were actually trying to help, like Frost was when everyone thought he was attacking?